Dennis was sitting in the dentist chair for a routine cleaning when the hygienist stopped and looked at him funny. "Does your gums bleed like this at home too?" He laughed it off. 67 years old, he figured a little blood in the sink was just what getting older looked like. But then he noticed the bruises, 2 of them on his forearm, and he couldn't remember bumping into anything. Dark purple, the kind that make you stare at your own arm like it belongs to someone else. He told himself it was nothing. Thin skin. Getting old. Maybe he bumped the counter and forgot. But here's the question I want you sitting with for the next few minutes. What if it wasn't aging at all? What if it was something he was doing every single morning, on purpose, because he believed it was protecting him? By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which supplement this is, exactly what number on the label should make you pause, and exactly what the actual published research says. Not internet rumors, not "a friend told me," but the real studies, so you can look at your own supplement shelf and know the difference between what's helping you and what might be quietly working against you. And I'll tell you right now, this isn't about some obscure powder from a shady website. A national health survey found that more than 1 in 10 American adults takes a vitamin E supplement at 400 international units or higher. That's tens of millions of people, right now, taking the exact dose we're about to walk through together. Something so ordinary, so trusted, that most people would never think to question it. One more thing before we get into it. I'm not going to make you wait until the last minute for the name, because that's not how I want to do this. The supplement we're talking about today is vitamin E, but stick with me, because knowing the name isn't the useful part. The useful part is understanding exactly why something this ordinary ended up producing results serious enough to make researchers stop and double-check their own numbers. That's the part that actually protects you. Let's start with what actually happened to Dennis, because his story is the whole video in miniature. 2 years before that dentist appointment, Dennis had a routine checkup, and his doctor mentioned his cholesterol was borderline. Nothing alarming, just something to watch. Dennis, being the kind of guy who takes his health seriously, went to the pharmacy that same week and picked up a bottle of vitamin E, 400 international units. The bottle practically sold itself. Heart health, antioxidant support, cellular protection. His own father had taken vitamin E for decades and lived into his 90s. So to Dennis, this felt less like a risk and more like a tradition. He started taking it every morning with his coffee, along with his daily low-dose aspirin, which his cardiologist had recommended years earlier for general heart protection. 2 vitamins. 2 safe things. That's the part I need you to really sit with, because this is where the myth lives. Here's the assumption almost all of us carry, and I want to name it honestly instead of dancing around it. More vitamins equals more protection. It feels true. It feels like common sense. If a little bit of something is good for you, more must be better, right? That instinct is exactly what the supplement aisle is built to sell to you. And it is, in most cases involving vitamins your body actually needs in small amounts, simply not how human physiology works. So let's get specific, because vague warnings don't help anybody make a real decision. We're talking about vitamin E, specifically a form called alpha-tocopherol, which is just the technical name for the exact vitamin E molecule sitting inside nearly every over-the-counter capsule in the country, whether it says vitamin E or natural vitamin E on the front. Here's the number that matters. The actual recommended daily amount of vitamin E for an adult is about 15 milligrams, roughly 22 international units if you're reading a natural source label. That's it. That's what your body is designed to use. Now look at what's actually sold on shelves. Almost every bottle you'll find is 200 or 400 international units. Some go even higher. That's not a small bump above what you need. That's 10 to 20 times the recommended amount in a single daily pill. And for years, the working theory, including among a lot of well-meaning doctors, was that even at those higher doses, vitamin E was essentially harmless. An extra antioxidant floating around your bloodstream, mopping up free radicals, doing quiet background work. What could possibly be the downside of that? It helps to understand where that confidence came from, because nobody invented it out of thin air. Starting in the 1970s, a wave of observational research kept finding the same pattern. People with higher vitamin E levels in their blood tended to have lower rates of heart disease. That's a genuinely exciting finding, and it's easy to see how it turned into public health advice almost overnight. Vitamin E got folded into the broader antioxidant boom of that era, right alongside beta-carotene and vitamin C, all marketed as insurance against aging itself. Millions of people, Dennis's father among them, took it daily for decades without a second thought. The problem is that observing something in the blood of healthy people who happen to eat well isn't the same as proving a pill causes the same protection. Those two things get confused constantly, and it took large, expensive, years-long randomized trials, the actual gold standard of evidence, to find out whether the pill version held up. That's exactly the kind of gap we check for before ever telling you a claim is solid, and in this case, the gap turned out to matter enormously. Here's where I need to pause and give you a screen you should really look at, because the answer researchers found was not what anyone expected, including the researchers themselves. Let's go back to Dennis and those bruises for a second, because his body was trying to tell him something specific. Vitamin E, at higher doses, doesn't just sit there being an antioxidant. It actively interferes with your blood's clotting machinery. It blunts platelet activity. Those are the cells that rush to a cut and clump together to seal it. And it also interferes with vitamin K, which your liver needs to build several of the proteins responsible for clotting in the first place. For most healthy people at low doses, that effect is minor, almost unnoticeable. But Dennis wasn't just taking vitamin E alone. He was combining it daily with aspirin, which already thins the blood through a completely separate mechanism. Two different anticoagulant pathways, stacking on top of each other every single morning for 2 years. Researchers actually followed a group of patients in this exact situation, people on standard blood-thinning medication, and tracked their vitamin E levels against how often they experienced bleeding events. The pattern that emerged was consistent. The patients with higher vitamin E levels in their blood had a meaningfully higher rate of bleeding, including some serious enough to need medical attention. This wasn't a fringe finding buried in an obscure journal. It was published in a major American Heart Association journal, and it built on decades of smaller case reports showing the same thing, dating back to the first documented case in a patient taking a much higher dose, 800 to 1200 units, alongside blood thinners. The risk is dose-related. It climbs as the amount goes up, which is exactly why stacking a supplement on top of an already thinned blood supply, even at a standard 400-unit dose, is worth a conversation with your doctor rather than an assumption either way. That's gum bleeding at the dentist. That's unexplained bruises on the forearm. That's exactly what Dennis was experiencing, and exactly why it wasn't just aging. His wife, Carol, actually noticed it before he did. She'd seen him nick himself shaving, and watched it take almost twice as long to stop as it used to. She mentioned it twice. Both times he brushed it off the same way most of us would. Thin skin, older blood vessels, nothing to worry about. It's worth naming that instinct honestly, because it's not foolish, it's just incomplete. Bruising and slower healing genuinely do become somewhat more common with age on their own. The problem is that somewhat more common, and twice as long to clot, plus spontaneous gum bleeding, are two very different pictures, and only one of them fits ordinary aging. But here's the part that made me want to make this video in the first place, because bleeding risk is actually the smaller story. The bigger one is what happens to people who aren't even on blood thinners at all. In 2005, a team of researchers led by Dr. Edgar Miller at Johns Hopkins did something nobody had really done before at this scale. They pooled the results of 19 separate clinical trials, real, randomized controlled studies, covering nearly 136,000 people, and they asked one specific question. As the dose of vitamin E goes up, what happens to a person's overall risk of dying, from any cause, during the study period? The expectation was that vitamin E would lower that risk, or at worst do nothing. Antioxidants were the golden child of preventive health at the time, doctors recommending them, magazine covers promoting them. And remember, Dennis wasn't taking some extreme megadose bought off a bodybuilding website. He was taking that same 400-unit bottle from the same drugstore shelf for 2 straight years, sitting squarely inside the range this massive analysis was built on. What the data actually showed was the opposite. At 400 international units per day or higher, the same dose sitting in most drugstore bottles, there was a statistically significant increase in all-cause mortality. Not a huge spike, not a dramatic single moment. A slow, steady, real increase that only showed up across the full weight of the evidence. All 136,000 people, all 19 trials, together. The lead author himself said publicly that this was a surprising finding. The lab work and the smaller observational studies had suggested protection, and the large controlled evidence said the opposite. That gap between what we assumed and what the actual trials showed is exactly why we verify claims like this against real published research instead of trusting what sounds intuitive. I want to pause here, because we're at the point in this video where a lot of channels would just pile on more scary numbers and move to the next section. I'm not going to do that, because scaring you isn't the goal. Understanding your actual risk is. So here's the honest nuance. This was a dose-response relationship. Lower doses, closer to what your body actually needs, did not show this pattern. This is specifically about high-dose supplementation, stacked daily, over long periods of time. Context matters, and I'd rather give you the real shape of the evidence than a flattened, scarier version of it. Now, here's where it gets even more specific, and if you're a man watching this, or you love a man in his 60s or 70s, this next part is the one to really pay attention to, because Dennis, sitting there every morning with his coffee and his pill, had never once connected his daily vitamin to this. In the early 2000s, the National Cancer Institute launched a massive study called SELECT, the Selenium and Vitamin E Cancer Prevention Trial. Over 35,000 healthy men were enrolled, split into groups taking selenium alone, vitamin E alone, both together, or a placebo. The entire premise of the study was built on genuinely promising earlier evidence suggesting these two supplements might actually prevent prostate cancer. The men taking vitamin E were given 400 international units a day, the same bottle Dennis had in his own cabinet. After about 7 years of follow-up, the results came back, and they stunned the research team. The men in the vitamin E-only group didn't have a lower rate of prostate cancer. They had a 17% higher rate compared to the men on placebo, 76 cases per 1,000, instead of 65. The gap kept widening the longer men stayed on the supplement, which told researchers this wasn't a fluke of timing, it was real and cumulative. This is a study that set out to prevent cancer, and appears to have instead nudged risk in the wrong direction. That's not a headline written by a supplement skeptic blog. That's the finding, published in JAMA, one of the most respected medical journals in the world. Here's the detail that explains why almost nobody's heard any of this. None of these findings, not the bleeding risk, not the mortality data, not the prostate cancer numbers, came from anyone doing something reckless. Nobody was taking a megadose off a bodybuilding forum. They were taking the exact same amount sold as the standard bottle at your pharmacy. That's what makes this worth your full attention, instead of a 15-second warning. Here's something else that genuinely surprised the scientific community, and I think it's the missing piece that ties this whole picture together. Vitamin E wasn't actually the first antioxidant supplement to produce this kind of reversal. Years earlier, researchers testing beta-carotene supplements in smokers, again expecting cancer protection, based on solid-looking observational data, found instead that the supplement group had a higher rate of lung cancer than the placebo group. That trial was stopped early because the Safety Monitoring Board couldn't ethically let it continue. A later, large review pooling multiple antioxidant supplement trials together, published in JAMA, found a similar pattern across several isolated antioxidant compounds taken in pill form. This is the piece Dennis had never considered. He'd always pictured his morning pill as a concentrated version of the almonds and spinach he already ate, just more efficient. It isn't, and that distinction is about to matter a lot for what he does next. Researchers have a name for this now, sometimes called the antioxidant paradox. Pulling one compound out of the complex web of nutrients it naturally travels with in food, then delivering it as an isolated, concentrated pill, doesn't behave the same way in your body as eating it as part of real food. Whole foods deliver vitamin E, bundled with hundreds of cooperating compounds, in ratios your body has processed for its entire evolutionary history. A capsule delivers one isolated molecule. In a concentrated dose, your body never evolved to handle all at once. That's the mechanism. Not magic, not conspiracy, just a genuinely more complicated relationship between isolated nutrients and whole food than the supplement aisle ever explains on the label. So where does that leave you? Sitting there, maybe looking at your own vitamin E bottle right now? Here's the good news, and I mean genuinely good news, because everything about this is reversible, and everything about this is within your control starting today. Quick, honest note before we go further. I'm not a doctor, and nothing in this video is medical advice. I can't see your blood work, your medication list, or your full history. What I can do is give you the real research, so that the conversation you have with your own doctor is a more informed one. This is the exact plan Dennis's doctor walked him through, piece by piece, so let's go through it the same way. First, you don't need to fear vitamin E itself. Almonds, sunflower seeds, spinach, avocado, wheat germ oil. These foods are full of natural vitamin E, delivered in the exact package your body recognizes, in doses that have never shown this pattern of harm in any study. If anything, diets naturally rich in these foods are consistently linked to better outcomes. This isn't a vitamin E is dangerous video. It's a high-dose isolated vitamin E in pill form deserves a second look video, and that distinction matters enormously. Second, if you are taking a supplement, check the actual number on the bottle. 15 to 30 milligrams, or roughly 22 to 45 international units, is the range most nutrition researchers consider a reasonable ceiling for someone not specifically directed otherwise by a physician. If your bottle says 200 or 400 international units, that's 10 to 20 times higher than what the research supports for general use. And here's a label detail worth knowing. Natural vitamin E is usually listed as D-alpha tocopherol, while synthetic is listed as DL-alpha tocopherol. Natural is somewhat more potent per milligram, but neither version is automatically safer at high doses. The form matters less than the number next to it. If you have any upcoming surgery, a colonoscopy, or even a routine round of blood work where clotting could matter, mention your vitamin E use specifically. Some physicians recommend pausing high-dose antioxidant supplements in the days beforehand, precisely because of this bleeding risk pathway. That's a conversation to have with your own doctor, not a rule to apply to yourself. But it's a conversation worth having before the appointment, not after something unexpected happens on the table. Third, and this is the one Dennis wishes someone had told him 2 years earlier. Always tell your doctor every single supplement you're taking, especially if you're on aspirin, warfarin, or any newer blood thinner. Vitamin E doesn't show up on a standard blood test the way a prescription medication does. Your doctor can't protect you from an interaction they don't know exists. Dennis brought his supplement bottle to his next appointment, actually set it on the desk, which his doctor told him more people should do. Once they connected the timeline, starting the vitamin 2 years ago, the aspirin already in place, the bleeding starting roughly around the same window, the picture became clear. He stopped the high-dose pill. Within about 6 weeks, the bruising stopped appearing. His next dental visit, no bleeding. Carol noticed before he even mentioned it, no more slow-healing nicks from shaving, no new bruises to ask about. He still eats plenty of almonds and spinach. He just doesn't take the pill anymore, and he brings every single supplement bottle to every appointment now, without being asked. That's the whole story, really. Not a scary chemical hiding in your food. Not some rare reaction that only happens to unlucky people. Just an ordinary bottle, an ordinary dose, and a gap between what the label implies and what the actual published research shows. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. 1. More of a vitamin is not automatically more protection. Your body has a range it actually uses, and going past that range doesn't add benefit. It can quietly add risk. 2. Isolated high-dose supplements and nutrients from real food are not interchangeable, even when they share a name on a label. 3. Every supplement you take belongs on the list you tell your doctor, not just your prescriptions. You're not powerless here, and you're not behind. You just needed the actual information, and now you have it. If this helped you look at your own supplement shelf a little differently, it would mean a lot if you subscribed. This channel exists to give you exactly this kind of honest, research-backed look at the things you're already doing every day for your health. Because here's the thing, vitamin E isn't alone on that shelf. There's another vitamin sitting in almost the exact same spot in most people's cabinets that can quietly build up in your liver at barely half the dose you'd expect to be dangerous, and most people taking it have no idea it's even fat-soluble. That one's next. I think you're going to want to see it.